meeting of the Executive Committee held on the 21st of June 2023. I can see that we have present Councillors Allison, Anderson, Brown, Carmichael, Chalmers, Clark, Convery, Cooper, Cowan, Devlin, Fagan, Miller, Hamilton, Horsham and Logan. We also have Councillors Loudon, Hugh MacDonald, McAllen, McClymont, McCreary, Leslie MacDonald, McGeever. Just checking to see if Councillor McLachlan's here, and he is, so he's here. I have apologies from Councillor Nelson, and Councillor Lambie is substituting, and I see that he's here at the meeting. I have apologies from Councillor Razak, and I see that Councillor Cowie is substituting and is here at the meeting. We also have present Councillors Robe, Ross, Shearer and Walker, and there are a number of officers present at the meeting also. And with that, I'll hand back to you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Before I begin, can I say I've been notified of 2 items of urgent business which I will take at the end of the agenda. One is on summer funding and one is on the Employment Tribunal relating to South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture. Can I come now to item 1, which is declarations of interests? Are there any declarations of interest? I'm not seeing any. Can I come now to item 2, which is minutes of the previous meeting? Are there any questions in the minutes of the previous meeting? I don't see any questions. Can I ask that we therefore agree the minutes as a correct record?
Agreed.
We're agreed. Can I come now to item 3, which is the revenue budget year-end report for 22-23, and can I invite Paul Manning to speak to the report?
Okay, thank you, Chair, and good morning, Committee. So this is the revenue budget year-end 2022-23. So this is the old year final monitoring report, and it's what forms the basis of the annual accounts. If I can take you first to the second page of the paper, and it's section 4, it talks about the General Services 2022-23 year-end position. And what it compares the year-end position to is the probable outturn. So what you'll remember is we reported to committee in February, at the beginning of February, a probable outturn position of just under £4.7 million of an underspend. So that was our best assessment at that point of how we thought the year was going to end. And what the paper tells us in section 4 is that the position has improved by £3.966 million, so just under £4 million. The main elements of that are summarised in that table in section 4. So you can see that midway down page 16. It says table 1, and it's got in the right-hand side column that movement from the probable outturn to the year end. So the table summarises and breaks down the main places where that additional underspend comes from. And that's what the next part of the paper goes through. So just taking it sort of line by line in the table, first of all, the resources position, how the individual departments have spent. So there's an improvement in position of just under £300,000. So we end up with an overspend against the resources of £55,000. What that section 4.5 notes is that at the probable outturn, it was agreed that there would be a clawback of funding from the IJB, and I need to come back to that at the end of the paper. So midway through paragraph 5, you can see that it says that as agreed at the probable outturn, what we were going to do was to deal with an overfunding to the IJB in the year, and we were going to take that back within the council. That was an amount of £5.6 million. So I'll come back to that at the end of the paper because there's a relevance to the year end for that. In terms of the things that make up our probable outturn position, at 4.7 it talks about loan charges. There's been a modest movement in the position there. The big thing that contributes to the improvement, which is taken us to this additional £4 million of extra underspend, is covered at 4.8, and that's under that heading of corporate items. So what it talks about there is the fact that that's £3.3 million better off, and it actually includes the impact of teachers' industrial action. So that's contributing and it's the biggest contributor to that extra underspend of £4 million. And again, at the foot of the page, it talks about council tax. Again, a modest movement there. So sections 4.11 and 4.12 talk about transfers to reserves. And what we do ask for permission to do, and this is covered in the recommendations, is to make additional transfers to reserves of £8.3 million. Now, again, they're covered in the appendix at the rear of the paper. That's on page 26. It's referred to there as Appendix 4. The biggest part of that relates to the service concession gain that we've got in year 2022-23. That makes up about half of that amount of money. So in summary, at the end of the year, we are £4 million better off than we thought we were going to be at the probable outturn. And section 4.13 just makes reference to what happens to that extra underspend. And what's said there at the end of 4.13 is that it's proposed that that money be used to meet future budget pressures, including children and families costs. And again, it refers there to section 5.6, which I'll come back to in a second. Section 5 covers the home carers' job evaluation and the outcome from that. Now, in terms of recurring costs, there are no implications covered in this paper. What you'll note that the paper does say at 5.1 is that it will result in significant recurring costs for the care at home service and the fact that that's delegated to the IJB. So there are these costs moving forward, but what section 5 talks about is the process that's followed in this eventuality. And that gets picked up at 5.2, where it states that a report will be provided to the IJB in good time detailing the financial consequences to detail appropriate action to be taken timelessly. Section 5.3 refers to a recovery plan. And at 5.4, the point's made that ordinarily an event like this would require to be met within the envelope of funding provided to the IJB. 5.4 does reference the financial position that faces the council and the IJB. Now, that is a statement of affairs was reported to the IJB at their meeting yesterday. Section 5.5 covers the backdated element of the outcome of the home carers' job evaluation. So it starts off talking about the outcome of the job evaluation and the review that was requested by the council. And at 5.6, the content that's given there is that we now know the outcome of that review and that a basis has been established for backdating to October 2020 and that there will be a cost, right? That will be included in year 2022-23. So we'll have to account for that in the year that we're now bringing to a close. Now, the relevance to this year-end report is covered just on that final page of the paper. And I come back to that mention I made earlier on about clawing back money from the IJB. Because that home carer back pay now requires to be paid, the IJB is not going to underspend. So we can't carry out that clawback of money from them. What the end of paragraph 5.6 talks about is the fact that we were going to use that clawed back money to help with children and families costs in year 2023-24. And what's proposed there is that we look to that additional underspend of just under £4 million as a means of contributing towards those children and families costs. Section 5 finishes off by mentioning that just given the recency with which we've brought the review of the home care job evaluation outcome to a close, and in terms of looking at those figures, it hasn't been possible to reflect all of the updated figures in the report. And it makes mention of the fact that what we need to do is to fully quantify the costs and the funding package. And I'll bring a report back on that to the August Executive Committee. So in terms of recommendations, going back to 2.1 on the first page of the paper, it looks for noting of that additional underspend. The next two recommendations cover the contributions to reserves. The recommendations then cover what would happen with that additional underspend. And then there are a run of 3 recommendations, 7, 8 and 9, which cover the home carers job evaluation. The fact that there's a recurring cost, the fact that the review's concluded, and the fact that that clawback of money can't take place now. The final recommendation that's down there at 10 is about the break-even position in the housing revenue account. So, Chair, I appreciate that's a lengthy report with a lot of content, and I'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Paul. I'm conscious there is an awful lot in that report, so if anyone has any questions, could you please indicate now and we'll do our best to work through them. Can I come to Ross Lambie in the first instance?
Thanks, Chair. Okay, so I was looking through the budget in detail, the accounts, and then what I was looking for specifically was £1 million, just over £1 million of taxpayers' money, and it's the money that's, we've all read in the papers, had to be spent to settle an employment tribunal. Now, I know, Chair, it's an urgent business matter later, so I'm going to stick purely to the financial aspect of it, and we can have a discussion on those events later. So I don't see any evidence of extra millions being given from this council to the Leisure Trust to settle that dispute anywhere in these papers. So I'm still at a loss where the million plus came from. Now, I serve as a board member on the Leisure Trust, as do several colleagues here today. And we and my colleagues have, more knowledge on the Leisure Trust's finances, reserves, etc., their budgets, their financial problems. But we can't discuss that in a public forum. We're effectively gagged from ever discussing that information because the way the Leisure Trust is set up. So it's really unfortunate that we can't interrogate the spending of taxpayers' money like that in a public forum like this today. So I'm still looking, where did the £1 million come from? The only publicly known additional cash flow given to the Leisure Trust from the council was several £1 million intended for the warm welcome in October 22, as advertised by the council and yourself, Chair, on social media. So I want an assurance today. Can you, as Chair, Leader of the Administration, give a 100% guarantee that all of those millions given to the Leisure Trust went to help the community when they most needed it, and none of it went to be set aside as a slush fund to deal with employment tribunals? As a question directed at the Chair.
Yeah, that's a question directed for me, and the purpose of that fund was to support South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture to provide the warm welcome initiative. No discussion took place around slush funds or anything else at that point in time or since. That is not what that money was intended for. Sorry. Ross Lambie.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. That wasn't really the question I was asking. I was asking for a 100% guarantee that all those millions have been spent helping the community. Can you give that guarantee?
I think I can give the guarantee that that is what the money was transferred to the trust for. You're a member of the board, and what happened afterwards is now a matter for the board. And if there's any issues with how you think the board may have allocated that money, please feel free to raise it with me.
Yeah, Chair, just before I go on to my own point, I did ask at a previous meeting for an update on how the warm welcome money was spent, and we have not yet received that report to ensure that what we asked for was delivered. What I was wanting to highlight today is, first of all, recognition to the staff about all the hard work throughout everywhere in being able to underspend by, I think it's £47 million in the previous year. That has to be recognised in difficult times without having damaged frontline services. But with Richard Nelson not being here, it's been left on myself to ask a familiar question. With that level of funding being transferred reserves, was any consideration given to allocating some of that to the new leisure centre in Lark Hall? And if not, does the fact that it has been used, it has been allocated for future, budget strategies. Is that funding still available? Could that funding still be used in that way?
I'm going to pass to Paul Manning in just a second to pick some of these issues up. But can I just maybe make the point that I don't really regard this ongoing issue of trying to plug a spending gap in the Lark Hall project as a laughing matter. And I know, and it comes up frequently, and councillors are quite right to raise it at every opportunity, and Councillor Nelson does. But the fundamental position that we're in has not changed. There's a substantial spending gap in that project, budget gap in that project that we are trying to fill. And it is the commitment that you have from this administration and the commitment that we're given publicly. And I think a commitment shared by all the councillors, including Councillor Nelson, is that we're going to do everything we can to plug that gap. And just returning to the question sort of repeatedly and asking the same question in different ways repeatedly isn't altering the facts. And the fact is that this council is substantially underfunded by our principal funder, the Scottish Government. There are extraordinary inflationary pressures out there. And if we're going to close this the budget gap in the project, and we're doing everything that we can to do that, those are the realities that we have to confront. Okay. Please feel free to relay that to Councillor Nelson, and I'll come to Paul Manning.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Allison. In terms of the transfers to reserves, right, and you can see those covered in the appendices at the rear of the paper. So you get pages 24 through to 26. They're pulled out in there in a degree of detail. The majority of that relates to reviews that we have carried out and were agreed through committee across the past 3 years. First of all, on loan charges, and latterly on service concessions. That plays in there as well. That contributes to that underspend, and it is carried forward with the purpose of using it for future year strategies. And that's something we pick up in the paper later on.
Alec?
Just, Paul, it was specifically, can that funding be used for any particular budgets when we have transferred them to reserves for future budget strategies? These budget strategies can be revenue or capital, and are not restricted in any other way. I'm quite aware of where they came from. That wasn't the question. It was about how they could be used in the future. Seriously.
Right. Councillor Allison, right? Sorry if I've picked you up wrongly, right? So what we picked out in previous papers when we approved the loans fund review and the service concession piece of work was that it generated capacity within the council's financial strategy moving forward. So that's there. It appears in year-end accounts the way it does here. What you'll see later on is that we look to take a decision about £27 million of that money with a view to using that in year 2024-25. So you haven't taken a decision at this point to use it in specific years, right? And it's there. It could be used for different purposes. My advice to you in making those moves and making those changes around the loans fund review and around service concessions was that you use it, as a contingent amount in future years to assist in budget strategies. But as we get to specific years, then we say that amount, and I think the figure that's there later on is 27.5, we're looking to use for that purpose. Yeah, and just it is a decision that yourselves will always be asked to take.
Okay, could I come to Eileen Logan?
Thanks very much, Chair. You answered part of what I was going to say to start with regard to slush funds, or was the money used properly? And I think you're right in saying that has to, if there's any dubiety, then that has to go back to board members who must ask those questions. They don't come here. But I think it's only right to say that as someone who uses the leisure centre in Carluke, normally 7 days a week if I can, that yes, the money was absolutely used to its full purpose, whatever was allocated to that leisure centre. There was an increase in young people, there was different things happened. And I think it's only right to say this as well. Our staff, or the Leisure Trust staff, should I say, is feeling a bit battered and bruised. Information goes out, they hear it, they know about it, they're superb. And I can only say that. I don't go in as Councillor Logan, I just go in as Eileen Logan, a citizen of Carluke. And they're so nice to absolutely everybody. It's a very well used centre, and I'm sure anybody else that goes to centres will say the same. So on the ground, as just somebody looking in, yes, it certainly was used to its full capacity. I can only speak, as I say, for my own town, and I think that the first part that you said is absolutely right. It should go to where it should if there's other questions to be asked. Thank you.
Are there any other questions to that report? I'm not seeing any other questions. Can we agree the report? Agreed. Can I now come to item 4, which is the revenue budget monitoring report, and I come back to Paul Manning.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So this is the new year, and this is the first monitoring report that we have for the new year. There are a couple of points that are just probably worth mentioning. The first one is at the foot of the first page, and it talks about the loans fund review. And again, just going back to some of the comment that we had across the last paper, the background to that is given there. The fact that it will lead to an underspend in loan charges of just over £15 million in the current year is laid out there. And it gives an indication as to how we'll deal with that as when we get to the end of the year. And again, this is part of this money that's getting used for future years' budget strategies. The reason I'm referencing it is it's a significant factor in the budgets in the year that we're about to go through. On the second page of the paper, there is just a bit of content again about 2023-24 investments. There's a reference there to the money that was put in for the extension of school clothing grants and the fact that that was allocated to cover a 5-year period and how we'll deal with that in 23-24 and in the subsequent years. So again, that's in line with what was intended when the budget was approved back in February. There's content at section 4.6 about how we would look to allocate the residual amount of COVID funding that's left. And then there's a section 5, which goes through the home carers job evaluation. And the points that are being made there are the same ones, essentially, that were made in the previous paper. So I'm not going to put them to you again. So see if I can go back to the recommendations. It's that the position on the general fund account at the 19th of May be noted, and that's break even, and the same position for the housing revenue account at the 19th of May as well. So again, Chair, happy to take any questions.
Okay, can I ask if there are any questions in this report? If there are, can you indicate now? Not seeing any questions in this report, so can I ask that we agree the report? Agreed. Move on. Item 5 is the capital budget monitoring final outturn report, and can I come back to Paul?
Right, thanks, Chair. So this is the old year for the capital programme. So this closes the year down, and this is what goes in the annual accounts. So the paper starts off by looking at what the programmes were, and that's at 3.1 and 3.2. So for general services, it was just over or just under £78.4 million. For the housing programme, it was just under £66.4 million. Then in section 4, it looks at what was actually spent. So there was spend of £65.7 million. So that's an underspend of 12.7. And the paper then covers the remainder of 4.1 and 4.2. Where did that underspend actually sit? What 4.2 tells us that this is mostly down to timing. And it directs you to an appendix at the rear of the paper, Appendix 2, where it covers the projects that were included within that underspending amount. And it gives a bit of detail as to when those things are actually now going to complete. So these are things that didn't happen in year 2022-23, but there's an indication there given in that appendix of the detail of when each thing will actually progress or come to a conclusion. Sections 4.3 and 4.4 go over various year-end adjustments. The points made at 4.5 that £12 2/3 million will be carried forward to the new year. And then there's a bit of detail given on the housing programme. So there is this underspend of £5 2/3 million on the housing programme, and there's a bit of detail given going down to the level of specific projects at 4.7 as to why that's ended up being the case. So in terms of recommendations at the front of the paper, it's looking for, in sequence, both for the general services and the housing programmes, noting of what was actually spent, and then approval of the carried forward for each programme. And then in the final recommendation there, it just notes that in the next paper for 23-24, we pick up the next part of the story as we move into the new year. So again, happy to take any questions, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions on this report? Not seeing any questions. Okay, then we can agree the report. Agreed. We'll come to item 6, which is the capital budget monitoring for this year. Back to you, Paul.
Thanks, Chair. So this is the New Year programme, and really this paper sets up the programme for the new year. So it starts off by 3.1, just making the point that when you approved the capital budget, it was a level of £91.061 million. See if I take you to the third page of the paper at section 4.9, and there's a table there. And what the table does is talk you through the story of how we're getting to a capital programme that we're going to monitor through the year. So the big things that you'll see in there is that figure of £91 million in bold at the top line. What we're adding to that midway down is the amount that was carried forward per the previous paper of £12 2/3 million. So these are the things for timing reasons that weren't done in 22-23 but get carried forward. Then there is a line, and it's the last one, it's the figure in brackets, and it's got a figure of £26.75 million in it. Now, there is a bit of content in at section 4.6 and 4.7 about what is happening there. And what we have tried to do across the 6 months since we first approved our capital programme for 23-24 is just giving the changeable circumstances that we're currently living through. Are we sure we are going to spend that level of money in year 2023-24? Or are there things that we should be identifying at this point which we remove from the programme and move into next year's programme? So we've been through that exercise. It's one we've done across the past 3 years. And what we're doing is we're reducing our programme by £26.75 million. And that's to get us to as realistic a figure and a target as possible that we'll work towards for year 23-24. There is a point noted at 4.7, the fact that within those projects is included Lark Hall Leisure Centre. But the point is made that if things progress with the centre, there is nothing to stop the money being brought back into the programme at any point. There is a line in there as well in the table. There's nothing against it at this point for the Leisure and Culture Transformation Fund. And what's said in there at 4.5 is that following the completion of the review of the Leisure Trust portfolio, that'll start to be brought in, right, to reflect the outcome of that. But there is a comment made to the effect that actually there is nothing to stop money being brought in sooner if projects are identified that we would want to take forward. So in terms of the programme, it takes us to one of just under £82 million. And the recommendations, Chair, look for approval of the position and also approval of some adjustments to the programme, which are listed at Appendix 2, which by and large relate to additional money that we've had come in, particularly from SPT, across the past couple of months. So again, happy to take any questions.
Okay, thanks for that, Paul. Are there any questions on this report? Not seeing any question. Oh, sorry. Alec Allison.
Yeah, the transformational fund, I understand what you say, but I wouldn't like that to be used simply as a first come, first served policy. Should we not have an overriding policy, if you like, to decide how we're going to invest that money in our leisure facilities so that we're making sure that we get the best investments and not just the first ones?
think we've just alluded to that, but I'll come back to Paul.
So I think I can give you a degree of comfort in that, Councillor Allison. So what's been pointed towards there is that review process, which would be reported. And then as I look to add things to the capital programme, I'd bring that to yourselves here anyway. So this is absolutely going to be within members' control.
Okay. I don't see any other questions. Can I come now to, can we agree that report? And can I come to item 7, which is additional funding from the Scottish Government and other sources? Paul.
Okay, so item 7, what this tells us about is that additional funding. It's additional capital funding this month. It totals £5.4 million. In the appendix, you can see that spread across 3 years. The bit that's spread across 3 years is the place-based investment programme. And there's a reference there to a report to the Community and Enterprise Committee at the end of May on that. So that's just noting the receipt of that extra money. And the other amount of money is for Strathclyde Partnership for Transport. You can see the individual projects that relates to picked out in the detail in the appendix as well. And that reflects what went in the last paper in terms of the content in that too. So again, Chair, just looking for noting of those additional amounts.
Okay, any questions? There are none. I agree with that report and move on to item 8. And back to you, Paul. This is on the revenue budget for next year. Paul.
Okay, listen, thank you. Right, so again, apologies, this is a lengthy report. So this is about the 2024-25 revenue budget. It kicks off with a starting point and it goes back to the position for 24-25 as it was given when you approved the 23-24 budget. So you'll remember that what we always try and do is give a medium-term picture around our expectations for future years' budgets. And we did that in February about 2024-25. The purpose of 25. At the end of section 3, it tells you the 3 areas that this report is going to cover. Right, the first of them is expenditure items, and they're covered at section 4. The next one is solutions, which we have identified to this point, which you can see in section 5. And section 6 covers the next steps in this process. So if I can move on to the second page of the report, there's a table there which summarises that first area about expenditure items. So that table's headed up Summary of Budget Strategy Expenditure Items. What this is trying to summarise are the additional things that need to be added to the budget for year 2024-25. There are 3 big items in there. The whole thing is analysed in full in detail at Appendix 1, but I'll stick to the summary at this point. The first of those big items relates to pay and pension items. So again, there are assumptions made there around pay award for teachers and non-teachers. Part of that makes assumption about 2023-24's pay award because that's not yet settled. But I have to make an estimate of that and on into 24-25 as well. The next big thing in that table is headed up reinstatement or impact of prior year budget decisions. That's the biggest one in there. That comes to just under £31 million. Now again, that's gone through in detail, but part of that covers the fact that across last year, the year before, and by that I mean years 22-23 and 23-24, there have been decisions to use amounts of money on a one-off basis to plug the budget gap. So we have to make that good when we're putting together the new year's budget. So that's a significant amount of burden being carried into the 24-25 exercise. The other big thing that's in there, it says contracts, impacts, or other inflation. So we are, as you'll be aware, still experiencing significant inflationary pressures. And some of the things that are covered in there around things like the secondary school modernisation contract, particularly in utilities, these are real burdens on the council's budget as we move forward. So if we take these things together, what that does, if you look to the bottom right-hand corner of that table, it adds over £60 million to the expenditure budget. So that's really a starting point. In section 5, that's headed up corporate solutions, and that begins to identify, well, what are the things that we can use to offset that £60 million budget gap? So you'll see there a reference to the fact that we do have an element of benefit from an increase in property numbers in terms of council tax. We've got some money that we can bring forward more quickly in terms of implementing changes around our systems and the savings that will come from those. And then we've got the biggest item that's in there, and that's about using some of that service concession money to reduce the budget gap. Again, and I'll come back to that later on in the paper, it's got a knock-on impact into year 25-26. If we use those corporate solutions in the way that's described there, it would bring the budget gap down to £29.2 million. The section 5.4 there just takes a bit of a rain check in comparison, of that £29.2 million going back to the figure of just under 17, which we talked about in February. The big things that are moving the budget gap up are the potential impact of further pay award costs. As it says there, that's more than half of that increase. It's £7.4 million. We're having to put in more money because of continued high levels of inflation. That's just under £2.2 million. And the biggest inflationary impact in there relates to utilities costs. And the estimates that I've got at the moment suggest that the increase into 24-25 is going to be just as big as the one that we had going into year 2023-24. So that puts another £4.7 million. So that's what's taken us up from that gap of £16.8 million in February to one of £29 million. At 5.5, the significance of that as a budget gap is stressed. And the point's made that consideration is going to have to be given regarding what the council does for its communities and the fact that difficult decisions will have to be made in order to balance this budget. The next section of the paper gives a recap on the discussions and the agreements around service concessions. And then at 5.9, and this is in line with the plans as they were laid out previously, the paper proposes using £27.5 million of the service concession retrospective benefit in 24-25. So despite the increase in budget gap, I'm not suggesting in this paper that we use any more of that service concession money than we'd suggested using back in February. It still leaves £18.5 million of service concession funding unallocated. So you can see that at 5.9. 5.11 looks at council tax. And within that £29.2 million budget gap, there hasn't been any account taken of any potential increase in council tax. But section 5.11 notes that for every 1% increase in Band D council tax, it will generate successive amounts of £1.5 million of income. It also notes at 5.2 how low South Lanarkshire's council tax is in comparison to the average for Scotland. Our Band D, just under £1,301, average for mainland Scotland, just under £1,410. The approach in relation to SLLC and the IJB is given at 5.13, and that's in line with previous years. I've then included a section again on home carers' job evaluation. This is the same material that we went through earlier, so I'm not proposing to talk to you about that again. And at 5.19, there's a section on reinstatement of temporary funding. So again, the point's being made there that if we use the service concession money on a one-off basis, the way we did last year, the way that's proposed that we do in year 2024-25, there will be a knock-on impact into 25-26 that we'll need to consider. So in terms of section 6, which covers summary and next steps, that gap and the extent of the gap is emphasised there at £29.2 million. And again, that's covered off in section 6 and reiterated at the end of section 6. The extent of the budget gap will mean that options have to go significantly beyond the level of efficiencies that have been made in previous years. I'll continue to refine the budget estimates over coming months and will provide updates to members in future reports. And options to meet the budget gap will be developed for members' consideration, as always, and brought back to a future meeting. Section 10 covers other implications, right? And there are risks that remain within the budget, and there are issues that we need to deal with and we need to manage moving forward. So some of these are picked out within section 10.3. You can see references there to children and families, school transport, waste contract, teachers' pension, and section 10.4 covers job evaluations. So again, the treatment of these things is covered off in section 10. If I can go back to the recommendations, it looks for noting of that budget gap of £29.2 million. It looks for approval of that service concession money as I dealt with in section 5.9. And it looks for agreement that options to meet the budget gap be developed for your consideration and brought back to a future meeting. So again, apologies for the length of the report, Chair, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thanks. That was I think, a necessarily long report. Does anyone wish to ask any questions? Could you indicate now? Could I come to Robert Brown?
Yes, thanks very much, Chair, and thank you to Paul for the report, which is, to say the least, doesn't make happy reading. Could I ask or make three observations? First of all, on service concessions, just a comment which I've made before, but I personally think it's actually quite appalling that the use or the redesignated use, if you like, of our money on service concessions is having to be used to such an extent to plug gaps. This is money that should be available to invest in the council's facilities. And the reality of the matter is, because of the level of support we're getting from the Scottish Government, that is not proving possible. Two other points on that, if I may. First of all, on the inflation, we heard inflation figures today under the jurisdiction of the Conservative government in London have in fact not come down as they predicted. Does that have further implications in terms of the budget figures we're going to have to meet next year? And secondly, in terms of the Scottish Government contributions, there are a number of bits and pieces to do with teacher pensions, to do with the pay awards and all that sort of thing. Do we know if there's any potential in terms of COSLA negotiations and so forth at the moment for there to be further contributions from the Scottish Government towards that in the year coming, which is what we're talking about here? Because bearing in mind the extent to which we're dependent, if you like, on 15% or thereabouts, I think, is our council tax contribution towards our own funding. The rest has to come from other resources somewhere else. Bearing in mind that, it's entirely reasonable the Scottish Government should make major contributions towards a number of these particular pressures.
Thanks for that. I'll maybe come to our officials to deal with some of those points, and I'll maybe come in on the point about COSLA. Paul.
Councillor Brown, I'll just start at the beginning in terms of the points that you've made, and obviously your point around how we're using the service concession money and your views about the use of that. Part of the reason that we're having to do with that comes on to the points that you made thereafter, and it's the extent of inflation and trying to cope with inflation within the resources that we've got is becoming an impossibility, right? And that has a bearing on the extent to which we've had to use that service concession money. Noting your comment about today's inflation rates and whether that's going to have an ongoing impact. See if I pick some of the more detailed things that are in there. So I make reference to, for example, the secondary schools PPP and the inflation-linked factor that's in there. You'll remember we had to put in extra money last year we had to put in extra money this year. And that's part of the movement that I'm seeing in the 24-25 figures from the beginning of the year. Now, the inflation figure that is in there is close to 9%. Right? Now, my hope was that would come down. It's not. Right? So I think today's inflation is somewhere around 8 3/4. Right? So at the moment, I have enough in there to cover today's inflation. Right? My hope would be that would start to calm down, right, as we get to the turn of the year. The month that counts for me with that is at the beginning of the next calendar year. Right, so that isn't going to represent an extra burden. The other big thing that's in there that's inflation linked is gas and electricity. We procure, as does the whole public sector in Scotland, right, through a government arrangement where they forward purchase energy. You'll have heard me say this here before. That helped us as we came into the crisis, but it means we take longer to come out of the crisis because they've had to buy energy when it was particularly high, and we're still paying for that through the contract. So my hope is that wouldn't get worse. There is definitely a point in what you're saying, which is around the more general impact of inflation. And where I'm coming from is, you will note in here, I'm really making provision in terms of inflation for the things that I have to. It's my contractual obligations. But right the way across what the departments are spending, they are suffering an inflationary impact. And they're working within the money that they've got. So as inflation stays high, their spending power decreases. Right? So that will impact on the services provided by the council moving forward. So I've rambled on, Councillor Brown. Can you remind me of your other question?
The last point was maybe the leaders going to deal with is the question of whether COSLA has got. Yeah, the leader maybe is going to deal with that, but the question is really whether there's any potential realistically for Scottish Government contributions on some of the individual items here, like teachers' pensions, like the pay awards, bearing in mind the 15% leverage issue that I mentioned before.
Okay, so on teachers' pensions, right, there's an acknowledgement in there that there may be a review of the employer's contribution rate. The belief I have at this point in time is that that's been recognised at a UK level and that there will be Barnett money passed over. Right, the reason I'm flagging that as a risk is it has to go through a process, right, as does all money of that nature. Right, I would hope we would get money for that. I would be deeply disappointed if we do not, and I would be back to tell you at a budget update before too long. In terms of other money coming from the Scottish Government, around things like paying around other things, I'm not seeing much hope of further money coming. Right? There are gaps within the Scottish Government's budget that they are working to close. And I'm not hearing or getting any optimism about other monies coming to fund specific pressures in this paper.
And I just wanted to pick up that last point about COSLA. Obviously, that at a COSLA level, local government collectively does lobby government for resources and for as fair a share of the Scottish budget as we can possibly achieve. I do have to say, I think there is an option that is before us of a joint COSLA leaders trade union approach to government, particularly to deal with the pressures arising from this year's pay claim, which so far does not appear to have been taken. And that, I have to say, is a source of frustration. We've got to be as robust as possible at that COSLA level. And the context, I have to say, people will have seen some of my comments in the press today, in the context of when you look at this budget, next year's budget is going to be utter hell if we don't have more resources injected into Scotland's councils. There is no way you can take £29.2 million out of the budget and not hurt the very people our councillors, our council staff, our professionals get into local government to help. This is not a place that we want to be. And I agree with your earlier comments. I think it's disgraceful after everything we know about local government finance all through the years that we're still in this position. Anyway, we'll see who's next. Kirsten Robb.
A couple of points, just one to clarify my understanding of something, and the second just to emphasise a point. On the service concession, just a wee question, but why they need to be reinstated, is that because it's to cover recurring costs? And the second one is just to emphasise the importance of the energy demand reduction plan, which Housing will prepare after my motion. Housing will prepare that by December. That was a year ago we put the motion forward. The energy costs are ratcheting up, as we've heard Paul talk about. So let's be ambitious with that energy demand reduction plan, see it coming forward and look at the savings we can make by turning the heat down a few degrees and other ways on energy efficiency. So just to emphasise the importance of that piece of work. Thank you.
Paul?
So just to pick up your first point, Councillor Robb, you're absolutely right in your assessment in terms of how we use the service concession monies. So that's one-off money, and it's been used to plug a gap in the budget for a single year. But the gap is a recurring aspect of our budget. So that's why in the following year we need to make that good. So that answers that question. I don't know if you were looking for a response from me on the second part, but from a financial point of view, I note your comment. Thank you.
Okay, thanks then. Are there any other questions on that report? If not, could I just refer you back to the recommendations? Can I ask that we agree the report?
Agreed.
Agreed. Can I come now to item 9 on Jackton Primary School and Early Learning Childcare Centre, the staffing requirements. I'll also take the opportunity to welcome Carol Mackenzie to the Executive Committee and pass over to Carol to speak to this report. Carol.
Thank you, Leader, and good morning, Committee. It's great to be here. You'll be pleased to learn this is a more brief report than the previous ones, and the purpose of this report is to advise on the staffing position of the new Jackton Primary School and Jackton Early Learning and Childcare Centre, and these are both on schedule to open in August 2023. I'll leave the recommendations for now, which I think are quite clear, but in terms of some background, we are on track to open the new Jackton Primary School and Early Learning Centre. It's currently under construction and it will be ready for occupation in August 2023. So going on to section 3, we give some further detail about the accommodation that will be available and the accommodation for both primary children and for early learning and childcare. 3.4 gives you the management structure of the school when it is running at full capacity. This management structure is based on our established formula, which we use across all our schools, so there is no change in the management structure arrangements. You will see from section 3.5 that we have already appointed a couple of our management posts. This is in common with opening other schools in the past where it seemed to be good practice to have a head and a head of centre in place prior to the building opening. And this is to really allow our new appointed leaders to make contact with parents, to organise some initial events. And I'm pleased to report that that is underway and all going really well. The new head teacher is Leslie Fee. She comes from Glasgow City Council and is a head teacher with a great deal of experience. And we have one of our own transferring from an East Kilbride provision, Nicola Wilson, who will become head of centre. Also in paragraph 3.5, you will note that the school building will be temporarily shared with Our Lady of Lourdes Primary School, just for one session while their own school building is undergoing some major works. And I know that's been a subject of discussion before. Moving on to section 4, gives you a table that of the staffing requirements when the school is at full capacity. And just for members' interests, while it will be a large primary school, currently, in terms of enrolment, we'll be looking for approximately 55 pupils in the primary sector to start at that August date, 2 ASN classes with 12 pupils, and a number of young people in our early learning, around 11 so far. So it is very much a kind of moving picture, but section 4 gives a table at what the staffing will be when it is at full capacity, which we hope doesn't take too long to get there. Moving on to section 5, some of the financial implications. Again, back to section 4, outlines the costs of staffing this school at full capacity. If we move on to later on in section 5, we can see that given the enrolment as we speak, that there will be part year staffing costs for 23-24, and these are an estimate given in section 5.2, and that will be regularly monitored and reviewed. Section 5.4 kind of indicates where the money will be coming from, and that we as an education resource will meet this current part year staffing through an existing budget, and then going forward any required revenue from this capital investment being considered as part of the main budget strategy. So referring back to the recommendations, which really give, I think, a clear outline of what we're looking for in terms of the way forward, that the committee is asked to approve the following: that the establishment of the management posts of head teacher and deputy head teacher to lead Jackton Primary School due to open in August 2023, as detailed in section 4, table 1, be approved; that the establishment of the management post of head of centre, deputy head of centre and team leader to lead Jackton Early Learning and Childcare Centre due to open in August 2023, again as detailed in section 4, table 1, be approved; that the staffing requirement based on capacity as outlined in table 1 for both establishments to be established in line with the standard pupil role related procedures, ASN staffing protocols and early years adult to child ratios, and including the staffing to cover facility services, which includes janitorial, catering and cleaning, be approved; that it be noted that as the roles increase, both establishments will continue to be staffed as required, and that the budgetary impact of the staffing requirements for both establishments as detailed in section 5 be noted. Thank you, Chair, and happy to take any questions.
Thanks for that report. Carol, can I ask if there are any questions on this item? I'm not seeing any questions. Okay, well, can I just congratulate Education Resources on all the progress that's been made with Jackton Primary. We're looking forward to see that open soon. And if there is no questions, can I ask that we agree the recommendations? We agreed? Yeah. We're agreed. Can we come now to item 10, which is on the social enterprise strategy? And can I ask David Booth to speak to the report?
Thank you very much, Chair. This report provides an overview and seeks approval for the South Lanarkshire Social Enterprise Strategy 2023 to 2027. In terms of background, as detailed in section 3.1 of the report, the Social Enterprise Strategy is one of a range of new economic documents which are inherently linked and fall within the recently approved broader economic strategy 2022-2027, and you'll note from there that the timescales are aligning so that both these strategies end at the same time. The strategy is also one of the outcomes of the Community Wealth Building Action Plan and sets out the Council's commitment to increase the number of social enterprises and to improve on the sustainability of that sector within South Lanarkshire. Officers have consulted with the third sector on the preparation of the strategy, and a newly established South Lanarkshire Social Economy Steering Group is a leadership group for developing and implementing it in practice. And the membership of that group is contained within section 3.5 of the report. Moving to section 4, The proposed strategy has 3 high-level priorities, which are to stimulate social enterprise, to develop stronger organisations, and to realise market opportunity, with a vision to cultivate a vibrant and growing social enterprise sector in South Lanarkshire, which creates social and environmental benefits for all. The remainder of section 4 of the report breaks down the social enterprise market in South Lanarkshire and outlines the proposed structure of the document. Section 4.7 of the report provides the proposed monitoring arrangements, which will be aligned to the existing monitoring arrangements introduced following approval of the broader economic development strategy. Section 5 of the report provides information on a pilot social enterprise accelerator programme which has been running and has offered targeted business support to 15 South Lanarkshire social enterprises from November 2022 through to February 2023. And procurement is underway to deliver a further 2 accelerator programmes in support of this strategy if approved. In addition, a bespoke procurement workshop was delivered by the Supplier Development Programme in April, enabling attendees to access expert information and support to become more tender friendly. In terms of next steps, if approved, officers will finalise the graphical content of the strategy and circulate in hard copy and communicate via the Council's social website and other social media outlets. And the strategy will be formally launched in autumn 2023 as part of a wider local event for enterprise and third sector and key stakeholders. In terms of employee implications, an economic development officer for social economy has been recruited to finalise and insist on the delivery of the strategy's action plan and to measure its success going forward. Financially, funds are available to finalise the strategy and action plan, which are included in the Council's revenue budgets, and external funding will be sought from the UK Government, Scottish Government and any other funding streams to maximise the impact of the social enterprise strategy. With that, I refer back to recommendations in section 2.1 of the report, and the recommendation is that South Lanarkshire's social enterprise strategy 2023 to 2027 be approved. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that report. David, can I ask if there are any questions? And can I come to Lindsay Hamilton in the first instance? It's my phone. Lindsay.
Oh, thank you very much. Just a quick note to welcome this strategy. It's really good reading. I really enjoyed it. Particularly want to mention 2 of the case studies that are within it that I know of personally. Councillor McClimate and I had the pleasure of visiting CCI, and I know that Councillor McClimate works closely with CCI and the great work that they're doing up in Lanark in the rural area there. It's absolutely fantastic. And also he mentioned Junior Play Cafe, got to declare an interest, like Erin's never out, my daughter's never out yet, but it's really, really good, and you can see the really good work that's done in the area in Hamilton with Junior Play Cafe, and it just shows you how good social enterprise is and how we should be growing it. So thank you very much for this report, David. It's really interesting.
Thank you very much for that. And can I come to Councillor Brown?
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. I'd like to welcome the report as well.
Hang on a second, we've cut you off. We'll put you back on.
I think it was me. Yeah, I think I cut myself off. Yeah, it's one of a suite of strategies, but I think it's an important one. And I'd like to draw the committee's attention to page 13 of the actual strategy itself, which talks about what does success look like. Because at the end of the day, we can have all the strategies in the world, but if what we need to do is deliver more social enterprises, more focused social enterprises, more work that's happening, because I think the whole net zero and climate change agenda is one which is particularly suited to social enterprises as well. And ultimately, there's also more opportunities for both local business and for job opportunities as well within it as well. So a lot of big plus things to this if we can get it right. And I think it's actually one of the most exciting things the Council's doing along the line. So very much welcome to the report.
Okay, thanks for that. And If there's no other question, I think from my point, I just want to emphasise the importance of partnership behind this. And actually, this has already been to our Community Wealth Building Commission, our Community Planning Partnership, really to make this work. This is a partnership endeavour. Can I ask that we agree the recommendations? Agreed. We're agreed. And can I come now to item 11, which is on equalities mainstreaming, and it's a progress report on equalities mainstreaming. And can I welcome Michelle Milne to the committee and invite Michelle to speak to this report? Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning. This report is to outline the progress the Council has made in relation to meeting our equality outcomes and mainstreaming equalities in our organisation. Members will be familiar with the background at Section 3 in regards to the specific duties of Scottish public authorities to publish a set of equality outcomes and a report showing progress being made in mainstreaming equality. We have been producing mainstreaming reports every 4 years since 2013 and progress reports 2 years after each mainstreaming report. The format and content ensures that we meet our statutory duties under the Equality Act Scotland 2010. This is a progress report reporting our actions since the mainstreaming report published in 2021 and covers the services which the Council delivers as well as the makeup of our workforce. Since the publication of mainstreaming report in 2021, the Council has reviewed its strategic outcomes. The equality outcomes have been reviewed and will be aligned to the new outcomes set out in the Council Connect Plan 22 to 27. You will see at section 4.5, resources have shared progress in relation to particular outcomes. For example, the work in the men's shed was particularly useful as we come out of lockdown restrictions, as older people were able to reconnect through this network. It also aligns with the Council's recent commitment to be an age-friendly community, the first council in Scotland to do so. We also continue to focus on improving services for the Gypsy Traveller communities on our 2 sites by involving and engaging with those communities about the types of improvements that are needed. In terms of the workforce analysis, the Equality and Human Rights Commission does provide guidance about how this is done, but we should be wary of comparisons with other councils as workforce composition varies hugely between councils, geography is very different, and the makeup of communities are also very, very different. And also just a reminder that employee information about protected characteristics is provided on a voluntary basis by employees and is always incomplete for that reason. The pay gap information and reporting now asks for mean, average and median midpoint pay gap information, and this is a change from previous reports, as you will recognise, which adds a bit more granularity to the data analysis. This data as well reflects the last complete financial year at the time of the writing of this report, which was March 2022. There is an overall small increase in the number of employees identifying being of ethnic minority background, and this reflects the considerable efforts being made to make South Lanarkshire attractive to applicants, and I know that this has been discussed in other committees. However, we will continue to work to improve figures in this area and are currently developing more actions with members of the Equal Opportunities Forum. This is one of our key equality outcomes, and the actions associated with that are outlined at page 125 to 130 of the report, which is in the pack. It includes working with schools and community groups to promote employment and training opportunities with the Council as well. And our gender pay gap has reduced each time it has been reported and currently sits at 4%. The outcomes which will be the focus of our work between now and 2025 are outlined in section 2, which is page 121 of the pack, and are summarised in section 6.2 of the report. One area which I'd like to mention today is the progress in relation to British Sign Language, which is on page 120 of the pack. This is about improving access to information, especially for people with sensory impairments, by continuing to action our British Sign Language plan. The plan aims to make Lanarkshire a place where people whose first or preferred language is BSL have the same opportunities to be active, healthy citizens and are able to make informed choices about every aspect of their lives. And recently our colleagues in education have extended BSL as a language choice in some mainstream schools for all pupils and provided short courses in BSL for those in the senior phase. This will help to mainstream BSL as a language choice and increase understanding of the deaf community. Elected members have also recently taken part in introductory sessions in BSL as part of this programme of increasing awareness and understanding. As a big report, but I wanted to summarise a few areas of that and highlight a few points, and I would refer committee back to the recommendation at section 2 that the progress report for the period 21 to 23 be approved. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that report. Could I come now to, well, if you wish to ask a question on the report, could you indicate now, and a few people already have, so could I come now to Ross Clark?
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thank you for the report. There's a lot of good work in it. I'd just like to start by wishing everyone a happy Pride Month and to welcome Gypsy, Roma and Traveller History Month. And on the report, I've got a couple questions and then more of a comment, but I'll ask them at once, but I'm happy to come back in to repeat if needed. On page 129, it mentions analyse the number of staff who've raised a grievance by race. Is this something we're able to be included in future reports for all protected characteristics? Because it's important that we keep track of these things to make sure we're doing what we can. And the second question would be on page 189 in terms of occupational segregation. Obviously, it mentions there some roles are heavily male and some are heavily female, and that contributes to the pay gap. When we're offering training, is this something that's taken into account in order to try and equalise these roles? And more of a comment, I've noticed it's quite light, the report, in terms of LGBT issues outside of education and providing training courses, which I understand because there may be a limited amount the council has power over, and there's a lot of good action within education. And so in the future, I'd like to see probably more consideration of the protected characteristics, sexual orientation and gender reassignment in these reports. If there's a limited amount of influence we have in other areas, and there's not much more that we can do, I think it's important that it says that so we know that it's been looked at. But those are my questions. Thank you. I'm happy to come back in if needed.
Thank you very much. Michelle, do you want to pick those up?
Yes, thanks, and thanks for the question and the comment. What I would say is that the world is changing, the makeup of our communities is always changing. So what I'll do is I'll take that information back to the Equal Opportunities Forum, and if we feel that there are areas that we can further expand, just in terms of our reporting and information and making sure that representation is there, we will certainly do that. In terms of training, that absolutely looks into the Equal Opportunities Forum and many other groups that we have and forums in the council. And we try to build that in, taking feedback from the forums and from staff to make sure that they are working as well as we can. And you know that as well, we try to encourage representation, and we've got a number of actions around that in terms of being more inclusive. And training is definitely there to support particularly people get into areas of work they wouldn't normally consider as well. So take all that on board. Thanks.
Thank you. Can I come to Kirsten Robb?
So I welcome the progress on equality and the increased focus on it. I notice on page 159 of the report that there's a mandatory requirement for all elected members and staff to get training within the first 6 months of being elected or appointed on the protected characteristics. I asked in the Equality Opportunities Forum when that training would be a year in, and the answer was, I don't know. So I was wondering if officers can investigate this and contact all elected members to ensure that they meet the requirement in the report and the duty we've got to ensure that training is done. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. I thought we did an online module on that, but I think we'll take your point and just follow that up. And I'm getting some nods in the room, which you might not be able to see if you're joining online, just to say that we'll do that. Can I come to Gladys? Do we have Gladys? Oh, Gladys, can you hear us? I think what I'll maybe do is come to Alec Allison and we'll try to come back to Gladys Miller. Alec?
Thanks, Chair. On Saturday, we were all hearing about how important the armed services are. One of the things that we did to try and help ex-servicemen was to guarantee them an interview if they were suitably qualified for roles. My understanding, at the very most, have employed one, if that. And I'm not sure that reflects entirely what we were looking for as an outcome from that. And I was hoping that this report might have, as well as highlighting all the good work we've done, perhaps direct how we're going to improve that situation. Because I don't believe that those so highly trained are not qualified for carrying out many of the roles that we are looking to be done and should be reflected in this report.
I note the comments that you're making, but what I would say is that this report relates to the Equality Act 2010, and that would not include veterans as a protected characteristic. The council separately has a policy around a guaranteed interview scheme for veterans, but I think we've had people who have listened, who have heard you at the point that you've made.
Okay.
I'm Gladys Ferguson-Miller looking to join us now.
She can hear us.
She can hear us, but
we can't hear or
right.
see her.
We
if she wanted to put into the chat.
Right. Right. Okay. So a message to Councillor Ferguson-Miller: we are unable to hear you when you join the meeting. So if you want to put your question in the chat, we will share that with the officers and try to respond to it. In the mean,
she's asking if she can leave and rejoin.
And if you can, feel free to leave and rejoin. And in the meantime, I'll take Councillor Brown. Okay.
Thank you very much, Chair. There's a good report, obviously, with a lot in it. I wanted to focus on a matter I've raised before, which is the issue of disablement and the opportunities to some extent that offer by the recruitment challenge we've currently got. That's referred to a degree on page 171 when it talks about the plan to establish an internal working group on that. But I wonder if the Equalities Forum could perhaps keep a close eye on this particular matter with regard to seeing how well we're doing in that regard. I know there's a lot of obstacles. You've got obviously disabled people generally. You know, some people have got skills in one thing, some in another. It may not be matching with the things we're actually looking for in particular areas. So there's quite a lot of challenge within that to get the balance right. But I can't help thinking there's a huge opportunity which perhaps won't recur when we've got job challenges in recruiting people in almost every sector you care to mention, to bring on board a number of the otherwise excluded categories who might have had greater difficulty in the past in getting employment there, and that we should actually keep a close eye on that, focus closely in on it, but also actually be careful to report back on where we've been successful and where the challenges are as well. Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, thanks. Michelle, do you want to respond to Councillor Brown?
Thank you. Just to say thank you very much for your input and comments on the report. Obviously, all of these activities, we will go through this report, this information. We will look at then feeding that back into the Equal Opportunities Forum. I will look at the reporting that we do around that and the monitoring against these actions. That will be the next meeting will be my first meeting, and we'll just review where we are, what we're doing, and take on board some of the suggestions for improvement where we can, and where we can report that information, because I know there's a keen interest on many of the elements in the report going forward.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to have another go at trying to bring in Councillor Miller. I think we have you this time. On you go.
Excellent. Thanks, Chair. I just want to commend education and introducing BSL to our high schools. South Lanarkshire is only the second council to do this, although I know many more are interested and they'll be watching what South Lanarkshire are doing. So thank you for that. The other thing is, in terms of the report, the achievements are all very diverse and there's clearly been a lot of effort across the council in this. In relation to mental health measures, they concentrate on children and young people, which is great, you know, given the levels of mental health in our young people. There's many people with mental health that have problems communicating with council and engaging. Housing staff probably have most exposure to citizens with mental health. However, people can have issues which cover all the resources, roads, waste, etc. So it would be really good to see how we can adapt the engagement with members of the community in mental health. I mentioned housing. Money Matters are other experts in this field because they're dealing with people every day and they understand how to engage with mental health. And I just think there's such a lot to learn, and I think housing and Money Matters could be good guides for the other departments. So it would be good to see that. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much, Gladys. We'll note your comments have been noted in the room. Could I come to Eileen Logan?
Oops. Oh, God. Thanks very much, Chair. It is an excellent report and a lot of information. It's just a sort of quick question, and I don't know if you get directly all your data from obviously different places, but my understanding of, and I was reading it through, the census or the people's, whatever it's called now, information, we were behind the rest of Scotland and Wales setting out our census, and there was a very, very low uptake, and then it got sent again, or people were encouraged again to put it in. But I don't know that we ever got in this country to the numbers that was, expected or required. So would that at any time skew, if the Scottish Government didn't get all the information, and does that skew maybe what's there? Because there'll be people in our communities who have no filled out their data. So how do you get behind that to bring everything up to date, basically?
Off there as well. Thank you. Well, really, in terms of this report, it's about workforce that we are focusing on. So we have that data in terms of the information that we hold in the council and the information that we have there. In terms of the wider census question, I know that we do work locally, but Paul, I don't know if you're wanting to maybe comment on that.
Goodbye, Paul Manning.
Okay, listen, thanks, Chair. It's probably a commitment to come back to you on this, Councillor Logan, where you're absolutely right. There are gauges in here that are taken against the census, but it's the last census, right? So as time goes by, that becomes more and more out of date. So you're right, it will start to skew the information, but what we can do is get an update in terms of the availability of that and when it's likely to feed into future reports. Definitely by the next update, but we'll get you a bit more information about how we can get some more currency in this. Thank you.
I was asking is that I sit in 3 different committees where that has been a problem or raised because the information that they're working on might not be, irrespective of its workforce or whatever. Maybe they didn't even fill in their, I don't know if it did, but it has been proved to be a huge, but there is gaps and big gaps in the information. But thanks, Paul, for your comments. And I think that it might definitely at some time be that people are sitting with incomplete information. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. There are no other questions, so can I ask that we agree the recommendations in the report? At this point, we have the remaining items for noting and the items of urgent business. Can I, with the committee's permission, suggest that we break now for 10 minutes and reconvene at 22? In just a moment. Right, folks, we're going to start the meeting. Can I come now to our items for noting? Item 12, and we have item 13. If you see, given the time, unless any members have any objections or any particular requests, can I suggest that we take item 12 and 13 together and just agree to note those items? Is the committee agreed with that? We're agreed. Okay, can I come now to item 14, which is urgent business? The first item was notified to me by Councillor Hamilton, so can I come to Councillor Hamilton?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for accepting this item of urgent business. The committee might not know, however, the money the council receives from the government in order to run the summer clubs through their education department has been severely cut. It came to light within weeks to go for the summer holidays that we were receiving no funding in order to run the clubs. At the height of this, we received our cut of 15 million last year, and our cut of 15 million previous years, and last year it was our cut of 10 million. This allowed the council to run a highly successful summer programme, which gave targeted young people who needed it the most 6 weeks of hot meals, fun and activities. It also allowed parents to have the peace of mind that their children were safe and they can continue to work during summer holidays. At the last minute, we've now been told that the government have found some money, however, it's significantly less than is needed. Whereas we do welcome the money that they have gave, I have written to the government minister about asking them to reconsider this cut. Ultimately, this means there will be no hot food provided, and we will need to cut the length of time we can run these clubs. And the funding the council can give to voluntary organisations who do such valuable work within our communities will also be cut. I'd like to ask officers for an update on where we stand, as I understand this will not be ready in time for Education Committee next week due to the SNP's government's shockingly short notice. Finally, last week we had an SNP councillor in the local paper praising the SNP government about reducing the poverty levels in South Lanarkshire. But at the same time, the cuts coming from the SNP government are plunging them straight back into poverty. It is taking money from the local authority, our local communities, and ultimately the mouths of our children and young people. I ask this SNP group, when are you going to start standing up for the people that you represent? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. I think what I'll do, if just to get an update on the position that we're in just now, could I come to education? Could I come to Carol?
Thank you. Yeah, and I'll stick to the facts here. Certainly this has been difficult for us in education resources. We were told that there was no money available. However, kind of the mid to end of last week, we got an indication that there was some money available. Now, so our share of £4 million has now become available, although we still don't have a figure about what that will actually mean for South Lanarkshire. But last year, our figure, when the share was divvied up, was around 530,000. We're looking somewhere this year of getting a share of funding which equates to about 230,000. The short notice has made it difficult to mobilise, but we are mobilising in terms of anticipating what we can deliver and working closely with our colleagues in community and enterprise and also with third sector. We will come up with a model that provides as much provision as we can within the envelope of money that is provided to us. But members will appreciate that in terms of mobilising this, this is last minute for us, but we will get there. As Councillor Hamilton indicated, because of the timescales of this, it's not been possible to get a paper through the system for committee. However, Lynn Sherry, my colleague in education, who I've been in touch with this morning, is currently working on a members' briefing that will be shared with all members just as soon as it is able to do so. But she has to wait until tomorrow until we get the actual figure available to us. So it is likely that we do run a provision, but it will be a reduced provision. It's likely that that provision will not be as long in terms of timescale as previous years. We are still battling with the issue of food and whether it is possible to provide some kind of lunches or snacks to ensure that the children that do attend don't go hungry when they come. But what I would say in an element of reassurance is our youth, family and community learning service are all on board with this, and we will provide the absolute best and most responsive service that is possible within the funding. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Carol. I think there's a few points coming out of that. If anyone wants to ask a question in this item, can I ask you to indicate now? I'll work through the members, and then I've just maybe got a question myself, but can I come to Katie Loudon?
Chair, good morning everyone, and thank you to Carol for that update. I do have a few questions on this, which I will come to first of all, for the sake of having the right to reply, I do believe it was my press release that Councillor Hamilton was referring to. So a few points on that. Between the 5 family payments that the Scottish Government is making just now, so we're talking Scottish Child Payment, Best Start Foods, Best Start grants, those could be worth over £10,000 by the time an eligible child turns 6, so just as they're starting school, and over £20,000 by the time an eligible child is 18. So let's just put some facts in this. Whereas UK Labour seem to have no plans to end any of the welfare changes, which are causing some of the terrible circumstances that families are finding themselves in just now. If they were to get into government, they've announced no plans to end age discrimination for universal credit, remove the 2-child cap, end the bedroom tax, and so on. And I think it's pretty astounding to sit here and dismiss the support which local families have had in this area coming directly to them. In South Lanarkshire, where we're just looking at one of those measures I talked about, the Scottish Child Payment, we're talking about over £15 million being paid directly to families. That's around 16,000 children in South Lanarkshire so far since that benefit has been started. However, back to the point in hand. I know we're waiting for further announcements on this, so we are dealing with limited information. And I thank Carol for her update. I think what's been obvious from previous funding for this area, that the flexibility of the criteria has been applied to it, and the opportunity that the council has had to make partnerships both within the council and between councils has been very valuable. I think we'd all be in agreement it's clear that a different model is needed here to make future summer programmes effective, and that's probably going to involve exploring options such as multi-year funding or an annual fund to cover all holiday periods that organisations would be able to plan better. This obviously is all sitting alongside the Scottish Government's steps to build a system of school-age wraparound care, childcare, which is a longer-term solution, which is building on the success of the expansion of early years that we've seen. So I do have 2 related questions, and the first one on this sort of targeted wraparound care. So I'm sure most people are aware there's a funding announcement in recent months about targeted wraparound care, including during holiday periods, which has been targeted towards families on the lowest incomes, so specifically who've got the 6 priority types identified in the Tackling Poverty Delivery Plan. I know that Clyde Gateway are one of the organisations who we know this year are going to receive a share of £50 million of funding for that wraparound care. And Clyde Gateway's lead partners previously were the Council's Education Department, Health and Social Care Partnership, SLLC and One Parent Family Scotland. So could we have an update, please, at the next future date, which is suitable, on the Council's and its partners' work on this project this year and what that's going to entail? A second question is around another project. This is Scottish Government and the SFA, who've previously successfully piloted holiday club activity, which includes food, multi-sports, classroom-based activities, and also employability support for parents and carers. And this has now been rolled out further, especially given the recent political decisions which have been taken in here, which have affected grassroots sports. And know that Councillor Hamilton had made reference to contacting the Scottish Government. Have the Council made any contact with the SFA or the Scottish Government specifically about these opportunities and how we might be able to empower local clubs to be able to take advantage of them? Thank you, Chair.
I'm going to bring in education, but specifically to deal with the matters that are pertinent to education. Is there anything in that, Carol, that you want to respond? I think if people want to make political comments, well, council's entitled to make them, but our officers want to just deal with the other issues. So, Carol.
Thank you. Certainly, there will be absolutely no problem in getting a report to you around the targeted wraparound care, and I'll get on to that, Councillor Loudon. I'm not aware of the SFA issue. That may be a fault of mine rather than a reflection on what's going on, but again, I will do some digging and find out.
I'm going to bring in David Booth just on that last point, who might be able to assist. David.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just specifically on that point with the SFA, I don't have the details on me about that actual fund at the moment. What I can say is that colleagues in South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture are working in very close partnership with SFA along a number of fronts, so I'll be able to provide information on where that's sitting at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I come now to Margaret Cowie?
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of things. I'm kind of disappointed to hear this. I'm involved in a lot of community groups, and in previous years we've relied on this funding to run our voluntary summer programmes. I do know of a couple of groups that aren't able to run anything this year just due to the lack of funding. Can I ask if the funding we are getting will be paid out to voluntary groups, or will it solely be used for South Lanarkshire to run their education provision during the summer?
Thanks, Councillor. I don't have a definitive answer about that because, as I indicated, this is a very live issue and we don't have a full briefing. But what I understand is there have been discussions, yes, not just within South Lanarkshire, but within the third, but how much scope we will have, given that we want to provide, a basic provision. I don't have the answer to you yet, but the members' briefing will detail that as well. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Carol. Can I come to Alec Allison?
Thanks, Chair. Just simply to support Lindsay's points here. These groups have been very important and have particularly helped the less well off in our society. And the fact that we are maybe not going to be able to support as many young people is disappointing. Regarding some of the things that Councillor Loudon said, just because you rearrange the chairs and the deck chairs in the Titanic, it doesn't mean to say you're going to actually change anything that's going to happen. So all these extra programmes, if you're taking it away from current programmes, end up not giving you anything extra. If it was so important, the Scottish Government does have the powers to vary social work payments, etc., and raise extra taxes to pay for these. They have chosen not to. So again, it's entirely in their own court. We have already decided to write to our own MSPs to try and get this raised at Holyrood so that we can try and get a better programme put back in place this year.
Thank you very much. Could I come to Margaret Walker?
Thanks, Chair. Just in relation to some of Councillor Loudon's comments before she went on to the main topic for discussion, I wonder, in terms of all of the initiatives that she's outlined, why the Children and Young People's Commissioner so badly trashed the Scottish Government's record across a range of areas for children and young people. Human rights, poverty, attainment, health and well-being. I think it was the worst report that has been produced in Scotland for decades and reflective of the situation with regard to falling standards in education in Britain, which was one of the SNP's main objectives and planks for improvement. It was sacrosanct in an area that not only the Children and Young People's Commissioner, but other organisations, Audit Scotland, far too many to mention in this committee, have actually said that the record is absolutely abysmal. So you outlined a lot of initiatives there, Katie, but according to independent organisations of experts in their field, they're not working.
Right. There are two more contributions. What I'm going to ask, though, can we maybe there's a wider issue here. As we go ahead, I want to come back to the issue of the summer funding programmes. So if anyone is, as I say, politicians are entitled to make comments, but if I could just ask for a bit of brevity if we're going to stray away from the core issue here of the summer programmes. Can I come to John Ross?
Very much, Chair. I'll be brief. I just think it's a wee bit disingenuous of Alec Allison to start castigating the Scottish Government when he knows fair well that the Scottish Government spends 740 million of their budget offsetting the Tory austerity and trying to support vulnerable people in Scotland. And yet we hear him castigating the Scottish Government, but he knows the reality of this situation. And I just feel it's disingenuous for him to do this. Thanks.
Katie Loudon.
Thank you, Chair. I will keep this very brief, as you have asked. Councillor Walker sat with me in an area committee where we were presented with what was a sector-leading inspection report for one of our secondary schools and a fantastic inspection report for one of our primary schools. I find it very depressing that we come in here on a regular basis and we have this, everything is terrible, everything is on fire, education is failing, when the evidence of how well we're doing in South Lanarkshire, how well our staff and our pupils are working is sitting right in front of us. And we are told in other committees, including in this one, that the work which is taking place here is leading the sector in Scotland. In terms of Councillor Allison's comment, if you had read the rest of my press release or seen it at all, Councillor Allison, I'm raising it since it has been raised previously. You'll see that I'd also made reference to the fact that the Tory government have contributed to the terrible situation that's affecting many of our families and their children just now because of the withdrawing of support for energy bills back in March and the pursuit of a hard Brexit at the cost of 100 billion to the economy, which I've never seen him making reference to in here when he complains about the Scottish government. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I want to just bring this back to the issue that Councillor Hamilton has raised. So, see, aside from the kind of the politics of it and the opinion about this, there's a fundamental point here, which is that if there is to be a change in policy and if the government are changing what their funding decisions are going to be, this is just about the worst possible way they could possibly do it. It's not acceptable that the week before the school term ends, we do not know what the provision will be over the summer holidays. That is an appalling position to put this council in. It's an appalling position to put our officials in, and it's an appalling position to put the communities and the children and the families in. And I will be building on what Councillor Hamilton has already done. I will ensure that that is raised at COSLA. The Scottish Government say they want a new deal with local government, a partnership, a lot of warm words, and none of that is consistent with the way in which they've chosen to approach this issue. I think it's an absolutely appalling position that they have put South Lanarkshire and indeed other local authorities in. My question now, and incidentally, I would encourage everyone to raise that through the respective forums that we can. Everything else to me is just deflection. That's the fundamental issue. In terms of the programme as we go forward, can I ask, Carol, when do we expect, I understand you're in a position now about pulling together a briefing for councillors. When it comes to actually communicating what that programme is going to be to the public, when do you think we'll be in a position to do that, and through what means? And Tom Little sitting next to you and I imagine would be happy to assist, but through what means do we think we'll be able to communicate that revised programme to the public?
Thank you. Well, I'm optimistic that we'll have a briefing ready by the end of this week. But obviously, we can't, in terms of how we best publicise it, I'll maybe defer to people with that bit more experience. This is day 3. I want to make sure we get this bit right. So there will be mechanisms to share with elected members. It won't be a committee paper, but it will be a full briefing about what we can provide, as I say, with the money we have, and giving your assurance that we'll do our absolutely best to make sure that the children who do attend get a fabulous experience.
Thank you. And I don't know if, well, you will liaise with Tom Little's department then when it comes to communicating that. Okay. If there are no other contributions in that, can I thank everybody for that item? We've got a second item of urgent business which has been communicated to me, and it's from Councillor Allison. So, Councillor Allison, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. This week there has been press reports regarding issues that we have had with the Leisure Trust. It is a issue I suppose we've all had for about 5 years now in different formats, but it is now public knowledge that the Leisure Trust are having to pay over £800,000 to an ex-employee, and on top of that will have legal costs. This is of significant public interest, bearing in mind that, well, if you put it into context, the SNP motion on concession charges could have been paid for twice over by the money that this has costed the Leisure Trust. They got extra funding last year, the Leisure Trust, to balance their budget. And at budget time, they handed the keys back to various properties, 3 of them in my own ward, because it didn't have sufficient funds to continue using them. Now they're telling us they've got money in reserve to actually pay this amount. I think we badly need an update from the council as to the position here and how it is affecting or is affecting and could affect the council. I've already twice asked for how the war money was spent. There is concerns that may be where this has come from. So although this is a Leisure Trust issue, there are significant questions here that I think are needing addressed by the council and our relationship with the Leisure Trust.
Okay, I'm going to come to our officials in just a second, but just to repeat from what was said earlier on, as far as I'm concerned, the council agreed what the council knows it agreed, what the group leaders were all in the room and agreed, which was the Warm Welcome Initiative. And at that point, the money is over to South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture. If there is a suggestion that it has not been used for the purpose for which it's intended, then I have to say that is something that South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture Board would have sight of that right now this council doesn't. And that is, as I said to Councillor Lambie, something that if he has evidence of, would have to raise with myself. But at that point, that is a matter for the Leisure and Culture to an employment tribunal payout. And I think the question was about what are the implications for the council. I'm going to come to our officials just to report back on that.
Thanks, Chair. So I'm going to set out maybe some tramlines around comments here because, as Geraldine's mentioned on a number of occasions, some of these matters relate to a third-party organisation and to their role as an employer with an individual. So those are the tramlines within which we need to make comment. I suppose the two things, just to take the latter point that Councillor Allison has raised, in terms of providing an update report regarding the Warm Welcome Initiative over the winter, which was much broader than the contribution that South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture made, we had committed to bringing that back, and the target would be bring that back to the committee in August, and we would make comment around that. In terms of the earlier comments, that organisation, so this is public information, has been unsuccessful in terms of its position at tribunal, and the outcome of that is a very significant compensatory payment being made to their former employee. But there is a difference between them having funding to meet that liability and an ongoing recurring budget. And the position that South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture reported at the budget time this year, where they withdrew services from a number of facilities, those facilities are part of a recurring budget. So that's a difference. But nonetheless, in meeting any liability, that will have undoubtedly significantly depleted the reserve that's held by the organisation. But as you've mentioned earlier, and to Councillor Lambie, that initially will be a matter for the board of that organisation to report on, first of all. So hopefully that's a reassurance to Councillor Allison. We will be bringing back a report in relation to the Warm Welcome initiative that took place over last winter.
Okay. Are there any other questions on this item? Yeah, I've got a few. Sorry, does that Alec? Do you want to come back in on that? Sorry, Alec.
First. Let others go first.
Ross Lambie.
Yeah, I mean, from a public's point of view, this is all taxpayers' money. So I don't think the kind of body swerving the discussion and just saying it's a third-party organisation washes in the public's eyes. I understand the legal position of the two organisations. So let me put this a different way then. Have you, as Leader of the Administration, asked SLLC how they've spent that warm welcome funds?
No, I haven't specifically asked, other than the reports that we've received regularly. You've clearly raised an issue that is of some concern to you, and I'm going to investigate it. But that is not something I've investigated before. I've got Leslie McDonald now, sorry. Leslie.
Thanks, Chair. In reading various articles about South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture, and indeed the former employee, it's a terrible state of affairs. However, one of the things I would like clarification on, please, is it the case that Councillor Ross did not accept the legal advice that was given to him?
I think that's a question for Councillor Ross. But I don't. He's welcome to participate if he wishes. Councillor Ross.
Thanks very much, Chair. I'm sure that our CEO will be able to give an explanation of the full workings, but as far as myself, when I was leader, when this situation arose, in order to protect South Lanarkshire Council, we worked along with both the Personnel Department and our legal group, and took all information based on both internal and external legal advice on the situation regarding the position with SLLC. So from my point of view, we did everything possible to protect South Lanarkshire Council in accordance with standard procedure. So, from my point of view, there's nothing more that we could have done at that time, and leaders were kept up to date with the position. But this was a matter.
Councillor Ross, I think Geraldine McCann wants to come in at this point, if that's all right.
Thank you.
It's not appropriate to discuss legal advice that was given at a public meeting. Legal advice is subject to legal privilege, and that is both by external and internal legal advisors to both the council and to SLLC. So we can't discuss that at a public meeting.
Right, okay, I've got a few people. So does Leslie McDonald want to come back on that?
Yep. Thanks for that, Geraldine. It's just the articles in the newspaper clearly state that legal advice was not accepted in one case, but other advice from as far as the tribunal's concerned is that it was not accepted. Sorry, I'm not trying to put you in a corner, trust me. However, if the newspapers can say that, is that the case, that the advice was not accepted?
So I think I'm going to bring in Geraldine McCann. I think the issue is going from commentary to actually giving a view about that is a problem. But I'm going to come to to Geraldine McCann.
I'm unable to answer that. All I can say is the subject of any legal advice that was given cannot be discussed in a public forum. It's given to particular individuals based on circumstances at the time, and that is caught by legal privilege.
Okay, I've got two more. So can I come to Councillor Lambie?
Thanks, Chair, for the indulgence and second comment. This one's really directed at the Chief Exec. The publicly available reports into this whole affair lay a lot of blame, also with the council as well as the Leisure Trust. So really, on behalf of the public, has anyone been held accountable within the council for these failings?
Cleland, I'm going to let you.
Thanks, Chair. And again, working within the particular tramline set out by Geraldine, the employer of the individual commissioned a further review of the procedure and outcome and shared with me on a privilege basis, just to use the language that Geraldine's mentioned, some of their findings or observations. My second reflection on this is we are almost 5 years beyond this incident, and personally I wasn't around at the time, so I don't know the detail. I've received information based on that kind of review and process, and South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture have introduced a range of different actions around that, including some that impacted on the relationship between the council and SLLC. Part of that, or a great part of that, is in relation to the governance and the formalisation of relationships. That was part of the scale process that's been reported to council previously. So yes, I am aware of the findings and observations provided by that third party to South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture, and have taken any actions that are necessary to address any recommendations they've put in place. Thanks.
Okay. Do you want to come back in, Councillor Lambie?
Okay, so I guess it's just coincidence that a key senior figure in the council retired a couple of weeks before this all became public.
Councillor, I don't think that's, and I can see Geraldine McCann's microphone has immediately come on. That is not something that we'd be able to discuss in this committee. Yeah, take that, Geraldine.
Yes, I wanted to reiterate that. You're correct, Chair. It would be inappropriate to discuss any matter of an employee within this committee.
Thank you. Could I come now to Councillor Allison?
Yeah, just following on from some of the things you're saying, this is the first opportunity we have really had to have any kind of discussion on this, Chair. The fact that it is 5 years ago that this started should not and cannot be an issue. As this is the earliest opportunity that we could take anything forward here. As far as the legal advice is concerned, I'm not interested in what the legal advice was. It was whether it was followed or not. And I'm not sure if that's a difference, it makes any difference. And finally, one of the things, we support the Leisure Trust to, am I correct, in the current year, about £21 million. Part of that is a one-off payment for, was it transitional change you called it, Joe? So therefore there has been one-off money put in here, and it's not all ongoing as having been suggested. But one of the things that's disturbed me most in this today in this conversation is that some people cannot speak openly about what they're doing and happening, and I don't mean regarding the legal advice. And I think that one of the things we need to insist upon in the future is having an open and transparent relationship with the Leisure Trust, and they do not hide behind their own guidelines. I do think we do need a proper a full update on where we are and what ongoing effects there may be to the council.
Right. I need to bring Geraldine McCann in at this point.
Thank you, Chair. Again, Councillor Allison, I'm not trying to obfuscate, but I can't reveal what was discussed at with any person concerning that case, because even any legal advice that was passed over, or whether it was accepted or not, that's all caught by client confidentiality and legal privilege. So it can't be discussed at a public meeting.
There are a couple more people that want to speak, and then I'm going to make a suggestion. But could I bring in Councillor Brown at this point?
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. I don't think there's any doubt that there's around the room a sense of unhappiness about the whole arrangements here, and I think that's entirely understandable because there's a lot of public money at stake, and some criticism of the council in terms of the tribunal report and so on and so forth. Now, I accept entirely there are tramlines around this and there are differences. I think the concern for today's meeting is really the implications, both past and future, for the council. Alec Allison's made the very valid point that transparency by the trust is an important aspect to this, and hopefully that's now being taken on board, and for the future there will be a more satisfactory arrangement for dealing with minutes and papers and all of that sort of that regard. I don't think, however, that does away with some concerns about what went on in the past here, because there's the questions, I think, of settlement negotiations. There's been the questions of the amount of money that's been involved in this and whether the right decisions were taken at the right time about it. There's the question of how far the council were involved in some of these kinds of things as well. Now, we are bound by the limitations on this. I don't want to go too far into that element of it. I make the observation, incidentally, that legal advice is legal advice. It's not a prediction necessarily as to what's going to happen. It sometimes is falsified by court or tribunal decisions. So there's a context to be taken on that one as well. But I'd like to ask the Chief Executive, if I may, if there's a method under which the investigation that he's conducted, the concerns that have been expressed about the room, can be reflected in some sort of report back to the council about the implications. Were there things that were done in the wrong way? Were there things which we should have done differently? Are there lessons we should be learning for the future? There's some missing bit here, if you like, that I think people around the room are a bit concerned about. Now, I'd like to have the Chief Executive, if you like, try and help us on that one and to see if there's issues we can take forward in some way or other. It may be some of that has to be in a confidential fashion of some sort to group leaders or something. It may be there's other ways of doing it. But I do think we have to actually, it's not something we can just kind of leave where we are at the moment. That's not particularly satisfactory.
Cleland, you're trying to come in Cleland then.
So one of the observations I would make is that history is generally written by the victors. So no party enters a legal process willingly, believing that regardless of what advice they've taken, that their case is not sound and does not have merit and has tested that merit. The outcome of this tribunal, I need to watch very carefully what I'm saying, the outcome of this tribunal is quite clear in the terms as written by the employment judge. And that set of observations prompted the employer to go and do a further review. And they've shared some information with me on that review. A great deal of the actions that are required to come from that review were overtaken, and this is not, and I'll take the point I think Councillor Allison made, that the distance of time doesn't negate some of the points that are made. The reason I mentioned the distance in time is that an awful lot of things have changed since then till now, and therefore a great many of the actions that were required were already overcome, and a great many others were in train at the time. I'll go and think further and, would you believe, take some internal legal advice about what can be shared about the actions that remained for us to take forward since that review report and what can then subsequently be shared. But I'll go back to the monitoring officer's clear indication that we are not able to discuss a great many of these points in a public session. But if there's a different way of providing assurance around transparency, then I will try to do so. The very final point I will make, which relates to Councillor Allison's request that the relationships between the Council and South Lanarkshire Leisure go forward in a much more transparent way. I think our colleagues in South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture have heard the comments been made around minutes and their meetings, etc. However, the guiding principle on any relationship is that we will always work within the law. So if there are areas where we are legally unable to discuss or present in a public forum regarding a third-party organisation, we will always be bound by that. But hopefully that gives you the reassurance, Councillor Brown, that I'll try to look at what scope I have within that.
Yeah, that's actually very, very welcome, Chair. This is like something that kind of issues we're looking for. There are issues.
Thank you. I've got two more people wanting to come in, and then I'm going to make. I've actually had a suggestion, incidentally, about the way forward, which is where I was trying to get to. Could I come to Councillor Cooper?
Of the earlier discussion due to an urgent phone call that I had to take, but I want to support what Robert Brown has said. And if I'm going over something that was discussed earlier, please forgive me. At the time when all of this was going on, and I was a member of the board at that time, there was an agreement that a review would be undertaken of the whole process by the council, and a report would be produced. At no time was there any indication that that report would not be made available to councillors. And I presume that's what Cleland's talking about, but we have never as councillors seen that report which had been agreed to be undertaken. And I think there's a feeling of disquiet among a number of my colleagues that hasn't happened.
Okay, I'm going to bring in Geraldine McCann.
Councillor Cooper, I can't comment on actions taken by SLLC, but my understanding is that the review that was carried out was done on a confidential basis and was shared with the Chief Executive on a confidential basis, and that's why it can't be discussed in a public forum. We would really need to have the permission of both the organisation who carried out the review, and that was a completely separate independent firm of solicitors, before we'd be able to share any of that and to have that confidentiality lifted in some way, maybe not wholly, but in some way to allow a briefing, as suggested by Councillor Brown, even the Chief Executive and the group leaders, to try and assuage some of the concerns that members have about this. But we may not be able to provide the full detail of that in a public forum.
Geraldine, I understand what you're saying, but I'm going back to the board meetings and the decision at the time to have a review of this. And there was also a discussion about who would undertake that, that it would be an organisation out with the council, that hadn't been actually involved in it, that it was a clear and transparent review. And I don't know, Councillor Convery was on the board at that time, but I certainly don't recollect anything being said at that time that review would not be made available to councillors. And I see Councillor Convery shaking his head. So I don't know when the decision was taken thereafter that this would be totally confidential, only to be shared with the Chief Executive. I do welcome consideration being given to the content of the report being shared with the group leaders. I think that would go some way to meet the needs of the situation. But I'm still going back to the original provision that was agreed, which was that there would be a report done and that would be shared with us. And this has come up at a number of meetings, even full council meetings, over a considerable period of time. If there are actions that have been taken by any party in this that have to be considered for how we develop in the future, and we have to look back and hold our hands up if errors were made. And I think councillors are entitled to know what steps have been taken to ensure that these kind of things don't happen in the future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I think we have potentially the beginnings of a process to try and address some of those concerns. Can I come to Ross Lambie?
Thanks again, Chair. So just kind of in summary, we've had a well-documented disaster and failure in administration and management, and it's cost the taxpayers £1 million. Community venues have closed throughout the whole of South Lanarkshire due to budgetary restraints. No one in this executive today knows where the £1 million to pay for this came from to fix this disaster. And it turns out no one has been held accountable. That's my takeaway from today's committee.
Right. Well, I'm going to come back maybe to the issue itself, so that, and feel free to interject, Geraldine, because I want to make sure I'm keeping myself right. But it does seem to me that there is quite legitimately an area for scrutiny for this committee, was the area of scrutiny that there was 5 years ago, when I was sitting over there and Councillor Ross was sitting here and moved the 36C to remove David Watson as chair of the board. And the question to me, because it didn't sit right at the time, and it doesn't sit right to this day, and we can see now what's and now a matter of public record and what has been said this week. The issue for me was, did the administration at the time threaten David Watson that if he did not change his position, he would be removed from the board of South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture? And that, to me, was the question that 5 years ago should have been answered in this committee and was not. It was shut down. And that is the question that, to this day, we've not had a clear answer about from the previous administration, because it seems to me that that is the turning point at which this all went wrong. And I'm going to give Councillor Ross, if he's still available, the opportunity to answer that question. Unless Geraldine McCann wants to interject, which indeed she has. Geraldine.
I just wanted to comment that membership of any committee lies within a group's decision-making powers. So a group can decide, any political group can decide to make a report to any committee to change its members. And that has happened throughout the life, not only of this council, but of previous councils. So the rationale for a member wanting to change, a group wanting to change its membership, is never made public. Nobody ever says, when they're making the recommendation for a change, we want to do it for X reason. They'll just say, we want to substitute Councillor X with Councillor Y on a particular committee or body.
Thanks for that, Geraldine. My question was about the reasons why, because I think that, to me, is where so much of this falls down. So I accept your point about they're under no obligation to provide an answer, but that, to me, seems to be the fundamental question that 5 years on, in terms of the democratic structure of the council, we could potentially prevented something at that point. John, your hand's up. Feel free to contribute or not. Up to you.
So I'm going to say something quite short, because again, I don't know whether I'm going to intervene anything that Geraldine may say, but anything we did at the time was taken under advice to protect the reputation of South Lanarkshire Council, and that's all I'm going to say on the matter. We sought advice, and that was to protect the reputation of South Lanarkshire Council. Thanks. Okay. I'm not going to be drawn on any more questions on it, Joe. Thanks.
Okay. Councillor Cooper, you, and then I'll bring this to a close. Councillor Cooper.
And later, when David Watson joined my group, I'm quite clear about the reasons why David Watson left the SNP group and joined the independent group. And I'm quite clear that in David's view, the threat that you suggested had been made to him, and that David kept his position
Can I interject here? That's hearsay. So
not
we
in a
can't-
court, Geraldine.
No, but we can't speculate about people's reasons for making any particular decision or what they may have said to someone else. It would have been a private matter within the group.
It wasn't a private matter in the group when John Ross invited me in to meet with him and asked me if I would chair the Leisure and Culture Board. And
hang on, sorry, I'm going to bring this to a conclusion. I'm sorry to interrupt, Councillor Cooper. I think we're at a point where there is the monitoring officer is interjecting. At that point, I think I'll maybe draw that particular line to a close. From my point of view, the suggestion I was going to make is actually the one that came from Councillor Brown, which is, can we review this to see what it may be legitimate to share, even with group leaders, or whether it says exempted business, because clearly there are a lot of factors today that are inhibiting the extent to which this can be discussed, and there still will be, even when the business is exempt. So I think there's a constructive suggestion there to take away from the meeting. Geraldine, is there anything more that you want to say just now? And then I'm going to bring Councillor Allison as the person that requested the business. Geraldine.
It's just to say again, to remind members, as Cleland, the Chief Executive, said at the very beginning, we've got clear tramlines there on what we can and can't say at a public meeting. And I'm giving you this advice because you have to be very careful to avoid defaming someone or breaching confidentiality. So that's my advice just now, Leader.
Okay, and I think with that advice, one more contribution and then we'll bring this to a close. Councillor Allison.
2 quick points regarding what you were saying yourself, Chairman. Anytime any of us are in an outside body, the training we get states quite clearly you act in the best interests of that body. You're not, and although you're there as a councillor, you're not there really to represent your council, your constituents. It's for the best of that body. And the concerns, to phrase it a different way, that I have from what you said, is that was not allowed to happen in this case. And that is a worry for this, a legitimate worry, I think, for this council. Secondly, I appreciate what you're saying about leaders and having a discussion there. I would like you to consider most fully about whether even going as far as a council meeting in, so what I'm looking for, behind closed, would be a better way so that every member can get as much information as what they can and still reflecting in the security that you're looking for. If that could at least be considered, Chair.
I think we'll consider it, but obviously take advice from our monitoring officer at that point. Right, I've got no other areas, no one else wishing to speak, and actually such an item of business is the one to which we're now going to come. So can I come now to item 15? And some people are going to have to make some arrangements around stopping the streaming of the meeting.